We have arrived at the UFC 312 fight week. Not the greatest pay-per-view in the world, but a couple of title fights, some interesting matchups. In today's video, we are going to be going through making predictions for every single matchup, the main card fights, and every single fight on the prelims. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you agree, disagree, let me hear it in the comments. But we are going to start off with a very highly anticipated prelim fight here. Aleksandre Topuria taking on Colby Thicknesse. So this is, if you're not familiar, Ilia Topuria's brother making his UFC debut. He is 5-1. His one loss, I think, was like over 10 years ago. He kind of had a long gap between that loss and then some of his recent wins. All 5 of those wins are by finish, 3 knockouts, 2 submissions. He has faced pretty awful comp. He only has one opponent with a winning record, and that guy was 3-1, so not even like a legit test here. He is built very similarly to Ilia, but just down a weight class at bantamweight. They kind of fight similar. Both are powerful strikers. I'd say Aleksandre kind of uses his grappling a little bit more than Ilia, but like I said, built the same. They're going to kind of bring the same things to the table here. On the other side, Colby Thicknesse is well-rounded. He's 7-0. He's a solid grappler, trains at the Volk gym. So this is kind of like the Ilia Topuria taking on Alexander Volkanovski in the corners. They may fight again. They kind of have a mini matchup here in this one on the prelims. I just view Topuria as the better prospect here. Training with Ilia brings a lot of the same things to the table. I'm going to go with Topuria by knockout. Maybe he clips him, finishes him, or I could see him getting his wrestling going and then getting a ground and pound finish, but going to go with Topuria here. Now in this next fight, we have Hyun Park taking on, I'm going to be honest, I'm not even trying to butcher this entire thing. The first name is Nyamjargal. The last name, not even going to attempt this one. I think Park is fun. He's 9-0, 4 knockouts, 4 submissions. I'd say he's primarily a grappler. Not terrible on the feet, but he does look a little uncomfortable when he's, not getting his grappling going. On the other side, Niam is 8-1, 5 submissions, 2 knockouts. He's 0-1 in the UFC, lost a split decision to Carlos Hernandez, who, has been a solid UFC fighter here. I've noticed, though, in some of his UFC fights, his road to the UFC fights, he has struggled to stop the takedowns. So even though he is a submission threat, he has been susceptible to getting taken down. He was taken down 6 times in a road to the UFC fight. In his matchup against Carlos Hernandez, he was taken down 4 times. I think Park is going to challenge him with the wrestling. I think he's going to take advantage of that. I'm going to go with Hyun Park by decision. Could he find a finish? Sure, but him just kind of grinding him out on the ground, going the 15-minute distance, that's going to be my pick. Next up, we have Kevin Jousset taking on Jonathan Micallef. Jousset's been solid. He's 2-1 in the UFC. He's primarily a striker, but can kind of mix it up. Won by submission in his UFC debut. He was looking pretty good against Bryan Battle. It was a very competitive fight. We know Bryan Battle's probably top 15 caliber. And then Battle just ended up pushing the pace, really putting the pressure on him, and it kind of melted Jousset. He ended up getting finished later on in the second round, but I don't think it was a bad performance. He was in there for a round and a half, and then, the tide kind of turned, and he ended up getting finished there. On the other side, Micallef is 7-1. This is his UFC debut. Had a nice triangle finish on the Contender Series. He wants to use his grappling or be in the clinch. In his only loss, I went back and watched this. He was knocked out, and that's fine. It happens. The point that I kind of took from that is I didn't love the body language when he would get hit. If he would get hit clean, it's good, right? You want to clinch, you want to find a takedown if you're kind of rocked, but he would get clipped and he would be desperately looking to close the distance in a way that I think can get him caught in future fights. It just seems like he didn't love to get hit, not that guys should, but the reaction just wasn't great. So going up against a striker here, someone who I think is well-rounded enough to kind of fend off the takedowns, I'm going to pick Kevin Jousset here by decision. Continuing on with the prelims, we have Kody Steele taking on Rongzhu. Steele is 7-0, coming off the Contender Series, 4 knockouts, 1 submission win. He had a nasty knockout to the body on the Contender Series. He has a lot of grappling experience. Not maybe the most composed technical guy on the feet. Not that he's technically bad, but he's just going to go out there and he is going to wing big punches on the feet. We saw that in the Contender Series, to the head, to the body. The punches are going to be powerful. On the other side here with Rongzhu, He has an insane amount of fights for a dude who is only 24 years old. He is 25-6. At 24 is wild. 14 knockouts, 7 submissions. Unfortunately, he just hasn't had a ton of success in the UFC. He is 1-3. His one win came against Brandon Jenkins, who is 0-2 in the UFC, and I believe now out of it. And then his losses have been to Chris Padilla, Ignacio Bahamondes, and then Rodrigo Vargas. In this matchup, I just think Steele is the better guy. Rongzhu is kind of proven to struggle with UFC comp. He is a good striker, but when someone can kind of pressure him, make him fight off the back foot, he's not as great. I do think Kody Steele can kind of initiate that game plan. And we've already seen Rongzhu struggle against, right, like solid UFC opponents. The jury's kind of still out here on Steele, so I'm going to go with Kody Steele by decision in this matchup. Now moving over to, I think, the only women's fight on this card. Could be an interesting one. We have Cong Wang taking on Bruna Brasil, and people were very, very high on Cong Wang. She had a super impressive debut. She was a huge favorite in her second fight and ended up, being a huge favorite that got actually finished. So her first loss was in November. It was a club and sub. She got clipped on the feet, back taken, rear naked choke, locked it in. She suffered her first loss. I'm still pretty high on her here. She's a dangerous striker. She hits hard. She showed solid grappling ability for someone who's come over from, I think, kickboxing or Muay Thai, at least when she's not, rocked and just hit the deck. On the other side with Bruna Brasil, she is 2-2 in the UFC, wins over Molly McCann and Shanna Bannon. Her L's have been against Anisi Gomes and Loma Lukebunmi. She is moving up to flyweight in this matchup. She likes to mix in the wrestling, fine on the feet. I just think in this matchup, if Cong does not get held down, which I don't really see happening with Bruna kind of moving up in weight, I think she'll be fine. So I'm going to go with Cong Wang by decision. Now probably one of the more fun matchups, especially on the prelims. We have Jack Jenkins taking on Gabriel Santos. Jenkins is just super fun to watch. He is a high-volume striker. Nasty, nasty leg kicks. He has broken multiple legs. I think he actually went on a streak of breaking over, 2 fighters' legs in a row, just fight after fight. He was just ripping the legs, destroying them. He's 3-1 in the UFC. He's had some success. On the other side, Santos's record is not great in the UFC, 1-2, but I think he is way better than that record is kind of reflecting. In his debut, he had to fight Lerone Murphy, someone who is now, locked into the top 15, a very, very good fighter, and he lost a very close split decision. And then in his next fight, he got caught against David Onama. Looked good, just got caught by a very, very dangerous striker. When we look at these two skill sets, my concern here for Jenkins is that he has been susceptible to getting takedowns. He's not a bad wrestler. He can wrestle offensively, but in some of his fights, the ones where he struggled, the Chepe fight, which ended up ending because he broke his arm or forearm trying to post on a takedown, but he wasn't looking amazing in that matchup, and it was because Chepe had landed a takedown, racked up 3 minutes of control time. Jamal Emmers, he won a split decision. Jenkins did, but it was pretty controversial, and I think a lot of people, including myself, thought that Emmers had clinched the final round because he landed a takedown in the third and then racked up 4 minutes of control time. He got taken down twice by the corpse of Herbert Burns, which is not a great sign. And then Santos has been able to go out and execute his wrestling. He took down Lerone Murphy 5 times in his debut. He took down David Onama in a fight that didn't get out of the second round twice. So I think he's going to be able to get the wrestling going. If Jenkins can stuff it and push the pace, I think it's interesting. But the fact that Jenkins doesn't really have consistent fight-ending power, he's more of someone who's going to break down his opponent, mix it up, head, body, legs, and just kind of overwhelm them. If he doesn't have the full 15 minutes to do that on the feet and he's having to constantly defend takedowns, he's on his back for portions of the fight, I just think he's going to have a tough kind of path to victory. So I'm going to go with Santos here by decision, but I do think this should be a fun matchup, especially if Jenkins can't stuff the wrestling. Another pretty fun fight here, 2 strikers. We have Tom Nolan taking on Slava Claus. Now, like I said, both these guys are strikers, and I think they both kind of have durability questions at this point. Tom Nolan is a huge lightweight. He is 6'3" with a 73-inch reach, and for someone who's 6'3" at lightweight, he's not overly lean. He's not out there looking like a stick in the weight class, which is even crazier. He's very dangerous on the feet, powerful kicks, fairly technical. He does get a little bit over aggressive and can be chinny. He was knocked out in his UFC debut, and then in his next fight, he won, but he was also dropped in that next one. On the other side with Slava Claus, he's a super fun striker, clean boxing, throws powerful hooks, really nice body work, mixes in the kicks. My concern with Slava Claus is that he has just taken some real damage in his last 3 fights. He was dropped in back-to-back fights by Sadikov and Chase Hooper. Getting dropped by Chase Hooper on the feet, not an ideal situation. And then he was in a very competitive fight against James Lontop. I really do not see this fight going the distance. I think there's going to be a finish. The big question is just going to be, does Tom Nolan catch Slava before Slava clips him? I think it's close. I think it'll be competitive, but I'm going to lean Tom Nolan by knockout. Next up, we are going to have Quillan Salkilld taking on Anshul Jubli. This is Salkild's UFC debut. He is a big lightweight frame, 6 feet tall, 75-inch reach. He's well-rounded, has nice kicks, solid wrestling. He's a submission threat. Just an overall very solid fighter making his debut here. Then for Jubli, he lost his last fight pretty much via barking. If you guys remember, this was the fight where he was doing pretty well, had probably won the first 2 rounds, and then Mike Breeden, who I believe is out of the UFC at this point, came into the 3rd round, started pushing the pace, and was literally like, hoo, 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 after he'd land every strike. And Jubli just looked freaked out, and he pretty much faded, got clipped, and got finished. So Breeden just, I guess, got in his head, started landing some shots, and Jubli kind of wilted. I think Jubli's fine. He has decent grappling. He's not really overly dangerous in any area, and I do think he's going to fade and wilt when someone really brings the fight to him, like we saw with Mike Breeden. I think Salkilld can definitely do it. I like the way he mixes it up. Pretty technical. I'm going to pick him by knockout, probably 2nd or 3rd round in this fight. Then we're going to go with Jake Matthews taking on Francisco Prado. In Jake Matthews' last 7 fights, he has gone win-loss, 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 win. So he has not been able to really get momentum going, but he's also not going on any long losing streaks here. I think everyone remembers with Jake Matthews, his most memorable fight, in my opinion, was the fight against Andre Fialho, where Fialho had kind of been building some momentum in the UFC. I think he had finished 3, maybe 4 guys straight, had just been very good. And then Jake Matthews just looked otherworldly on the feet, looked like he had really turned a corner. Then he went out in his next fight and was dropped 3 times by Matthew Semmelsberger, who is either at the edge of being out of the UFC or already out of their promotion. He is pretty well-rounded, but it definitely just seems like he cannot step up and beat that next level. Fortunately for him, Prado really isn't that step up into the next level. He is up from lightweight. He is 1-2 in the UFC, losses to Daniel Zellhuber and Jamie Malarkey, and then his 1 win is against Atman Zaitar. In terms of his finishes, he does seem to be pretty well-rounded, 6 knockouts, 6 submissions. The issue is in the UFC, he's pretty much been entirely striking, and part of it is just maybe that's what he wants to do, but he also just has not had the skill set to get the fight to the ground to set up his submission game. He is 0 for 5 on takedowns in his 3 fights. I don't think Jake Matthews is top 15 level at welterweight, but he's 13-7 in the UFC. Prado didn't really have a huge frame for 155. I mean, he was super outsized, especially just height reach against Daniel Zellhuber in his last fight. Now he's moving up to 170 against someone who has had success there. I just don't really see Prado's path to victory. Maybe he catches him, clips him, finishes him. I just have a tough time picking against Jake Matthews here. Going to go with Matthews by decision. Now a very interesting fight, pretty tough to break down here. We have Jimmy Crute taking on Rodolfo Bellato. And this is just an odd situation with Jimmy Crute. I want to start off by saying he is only 28 years old. He is 0-3-1 in his last 4 fights, and he was finished in all 3 of those losses. He essentially retired, left his gloves in the cage. He's been off for a 1.5 years, and he's now coming back. So he's kind of had this career arc of he came into the UFC, had a ton of success. I think it was 4-1 in his first 5 fights, then seemingly fell off, retired. You'd think he was 36, 37, 38, 39. Not someone who's 28, and in terms of his age, may not have even been close to his prime at this point. He's a powerful striker, has really good jiu-jitsu for someone up at light heavyweight, has a submission win over Paul Craig. He has 5 knockouts, 4 submissions in his career. I think the big concerns with Jimmy Crute are just his durability, and then also the fact that he just didn't look good in his last 4 fights. even though the age looks good, he seemingly has regressed in his last 4 matchups. And then also, like, how committed is he when he's been retired? Has he been working, or is this like they're coming home, I'm going to get one last fight? Like, what is the headspace right now for a guy like Jimmy Crute? On the other side with Bellato, he is 12-2. His only losses have actually both been to Vitor Petrino, which I guess not aging super well with Petrino, back-to-back losses, but he was viewed as a top prospect coming in. Bellato is very hittable, does not have a ton of head movement, not great at really avoiding anything. He was getting touched up by Ihor Potieria, which is not a great sign because Ihor has not had much success in the UFC and is, probably a middleweight in terms of his frame. And he pretty much beat Ihor by getting clipped, getting dropped, absorbing an insane amount of damage, an insane amount of ground and pound, to the point where Potieria was just exhausted and had nothing left. And then Bellato was able to get the finish. He's a big 205er, 6'3", 78-inch reach, built just like an absolute tank. So I could totally see him going out, clipping Crute early on and getting the finish and kind of continuing this downslide for Crute. But I just think in terms of ability, what we've seen, Crute's powerful. He can get his grappling going if he wants to. I'm going to go with Crute by round 1 knockout. If he lost, I would not be shocked at all. It's a very odd fight, but I just think in terms of their skill sets, I think Jimmy Crute is the more skilled guy, and that is why I'm going to be going with him. Now, maybe the worst third to last pay-per-view fight of all time. We have Taliesin Teixeira taking on Justin Tafa. Tafa's 4-4 in the UFC. He has 4 round 1 knockouts against, pretty much bums in the heavyweight weight class. And then he has decision losses to Carl Williams, Jared Vanderaa, and Carlos Felipe. And then he was KO'd by Yorgan De Castro in his, one UFC finish loss. He has pretty much 0 wrestling, but is a solid kickboxer. I don't really think the limited wrestling is going to be a factor here because this does look like it's striker versus striker. Teixeira is 7-0. He has an insane frame for heavyweight. He is 6'7" with an 83-inch reach. He is going to have a 7-inch height advantage and a 9-inch reach advantage. So in terms of heavyweight prospects, he does look pretty interesting. He is still very green. All of his fights have been round 1 knockouts, so he has not been extended. We don't really know what the cardio looks like. And he's also just been going up against very low-level competition. If they're going to go out there, stand and bang, which they probably will, I'm just going to side with Teixeira here. He likely has way less tread on the tires. He's going to have the major size advantage. Maybe he fades, but it's not like Tafa has some sort of insane cardio here. I just think Teixeira is the more interesting prospect. So I'm going to pick him by round 1 knockout. Could Tafa go out and finish him? Sure. Like, if you're not taking him down, it does give him a much better shot. But my pick's going to be Teixeira, round 1 knockout. Now we are at the co-main event. I mean, this is, in my opinion, the best fight on this card. I'm way more excited for this one than anyone else, even the main event. Like, this Zhang Weili, Tatiana Suarez fight, in my opinion, this is the matchup here. So for Zhang Weili, she is on a 4-fight win streak. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Carla Esparza, Amanda Lemos, and then Yan Xiaonan. She had 2 finishes out of those 4, Joanna and Esparza, and then 2 extremely dominant decisions. I want to say the Lemos one was like 50-45, 50-44, 50-43, something crazy like that. And then for Yan Xiaonan, I think it was 49-45 on 2 scorecards, so 1-4 rounds, one of them as a 10-8. On that streak, she has been fairly grappling heavy. She used the takedowns against Joanna, 4 of them, even though it ended in spinning back fist. She did a lot of damage on the ground in the first round. And then she submitted Carla Esparza, and then she had 6 takedowns against both Lemos and Yan. And in her last 2 combined fights, the Lemos and Yan fights, she is combined for 29 minutes of control time. So nearly like 15 minutes in each of those fights, which is an insane amount of control, especially for someone who, also is very good on the feet. Tatiana Suarez, though, is a real challenge. She is 10-0 as a pro, 7-0 in the UFC, and she is finishing fights in her career. She has 5 submissions, 2 knockouts. She has finished the likes of Alexa Grasso, Jessica Andrade, and Carla Esparza. She truly does have elite grappling here. And I know Weili is an elite athlete. She can outpower her opponents. She's been able to kind of explode out of bad positions. We kind of saw it in the Esparza fight where she gets taken down, but she's able to reverse it because she's just, infinitely more explosive and an infinitely better athlete than Carla. Tatiana Suarez is not Carla Esparza. She is not Amanda Lemos. She is not Yan Xiaonan. Weili's takedown defense has not been great in her career, only at 50%. And we look at someone like Rose, someone who's, a more technical grappler, not, I would say, as great of an athlete as Weili, but, she is very good, an all-time great in the strawweight weight class. She was able to control Zhang Weili for 7 minutes, and that was a big part of her winning that second matchup. I think in the wrestling, the grappling, there is a big edge there for Tatiana Suarez. I think pretty much everything else favors Zhang Weili. She has the 5-round experience. She's been more active, doesn't have the injury history. I think she is the better striker. So this is very interesting to me. I think a lot of people are just going to pencil in Weili because she's been so great. Tatiana Suarez, hasn't been consistently fighting that championship level competition. But I'm going to go with Tatiana Suarez here. I'm kind of going back and forth between submission and decision. I'm going to go with decision just based on Weili's cardio. I don't think she's going to completely fade and, wilt and give up. But I'm going to go with Suarez by decision. I think this is a super interesting matchup. It's been a long time coming for Tatiana Suarez to get a title shot. I'm just glad she's been able to kind of stay healthy, build on this, and actually get to this moment. So my pick is going to be Tatiana Suarez by decision, but I'm very excited for this matchup. And now we've arrived at the main event here, the rematch between Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland. The first fight was very, very close. I know some people think it was a robbery. Got to remind everyone, close fights are not robberies. Could have gone either way. I think DDP clearly won 1 round. I think Strickland clearly won 2 rounds. And then there are 2 rounds that are up in the air. So, going to DDP, not the craziest thing in the world. I feel much better about DDP in this rematch. I feel like Sean Strickland just has a very limited path to victory. It's probably a decision. Don't see him submitting DDP. And he just doesn't have a ton of finishing upside. He has 2 knockdowns in his last 10 fights. One of those was against Abu Smagomedov, who was unranked, had really no business being in there. And then the other one, Izzy, at the time looked great. Hasn't necessarily aged extremely well, but pretty much 1 legit knockout in his last 10 opponents. And then he also just has no wrestling threat. He has 0 takedowns in his last 4 fights. So we're pretty much looking at, does Sean Strickland win a standing teep jab battle decision, or does DDP win in literally any other way? I think DDP is more powerful. I think he's more dangerous. He mixes it up. He's landed a takedown in each of his last 5 fights, landed 6 takedowns in the first Sean Strickland matchup, landed 4 against Izzy. I think he is the more durable guy. I mean, the dude is built like a tank. He'll get hit clean. It doesn't even matter to him. I'm also just very high on his team. I think they come in with unique game plans to every matchup. I think we really saw that in the Whitaker fight. I think against Izzy, he was a lot more patient, wasn't doing a lot of his sloppy blitzes that he's kind of known for. So I think he's going to have a good game plan here. I think having experience fighting Sean Strickland is a plus. He's someone with a very unique style, kind of tough to train for. I think the fact that he's been in there with him, that's going to help him out. I just think he's going to do a lot of what he did in the first fight, but I think he's going to have more success. I think he's going to rack up more control time. I'm actually going to pick DDP to finish Sean Strickland. I'm going to go knockout in round 3. I just think he's going to look much better. And I just can't pick against him based on the fact that I think he can win by decision. We've already seen it happen. I think he can win by knockout. I think he can win by submission. These are all very possible outcomes. I don't like the fact that there's this one narrow likely path for Sean Strickland. It's just not really something I want to bank on, especially when DDP can mix it up. And even if it is a pure standing fight, I still think DDP can win that. I think he's the more dangerous guy. I think he can clip him, hurt him, finish him on the feet. So DDP by knockout is going to be my pick. Hopefully it's an interesting fight, and then hopefully we get to see Khamzat take on the winner. But that is going to wrap it up for my full card UFC 312 predictions. Let me know your picks for the main card in the comments. Would love to hear them. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.